Hi, it's Lee from colouringqueen.net, and I hope you're doing well today. Today we have a funny story. Well, not really funny. We have a story, I'm not really sure if it is a crime and colouring story, but I wanted to tell it to you because often when I'm researching a story to tell you about, I come across stories where they just really pull on my heartstrings for a variety of reasons. Sometimes I can't tell you these stories because the details are not appropriate for this channel. Now, today's story is a bit of a mixed bag. I want to tell you about this woman because when researching her story, I just was so inspired by her compassion, determination, her resilience and adaptability. But to really tell her story, I need to give you some background on her. And that background will refer to war times and things associated with that, if you know what I mean. And while I won't talk about any nastiness directly, there will be some references so you can get the picture. And if this is triggering for you, I suggest that you scroll away now. So let's get to it. It was a warm day on July 12th, 2001 in Houston, Texas. It was between 5 and 5:30 a.m. when the petite 4'11", 100-pound pocket rocket of a woman, Tot Tran Harriman, or Totsy as she was known, left her son Min's home. She'd been staying there and with her daughter in the Houston area for a couple of weeks, and she was on her way to make a new start. It was an exciting time. This was going to be a new chapter in her life. At 57 years old, Totsy had had a life that could have easily been made into a movie. It was a completely different life that she would be living now, far away from her humble beginnings as a child in Vietnam. She stopped off between her eldest son and her only daughter's home in the Houston area, and as I said, she was there for a couple of weeks. This was a stopover because she was making her way along the Texas coast to look at properties. One for her own dream home, hopefully close to the ocean that she loved, and within visiting distance from her children. Initially, she was going to stay in Brownsville or look for property there, but her children pointed out to her that that would actually be further away from her. So then she decided that she would look for properties along the Gulf Coast, and maybe she would even have enough money to rent out and live off some of the properties that she bought as an investment. Her daughter had helped her plan out her route along the old Route 35, which hugs the Gulf Coast from League City to Corpus Christi. It's a scenic and historic route that's away from the major highways and roads that Totsy disliked. Her daughter insured her car, a maroon Lincoln with personalised number plates, had plenty of fuel. It had at least 3/4 of a tank. July 12th seemed like an ideal day for the departure. Totsy woke early, and it's believed that she dressed in a shirt, shorts, and sandals. She was wearing her usual gold rings and 7 gold bangles on her wrist with a diamond pendant. Before she left, sometime between 5 and 5:30, she kissed her eldest son, Min, who was still laying in bed half awake, and she kissed him goodbye. It was the last time Min would ever see his mother again. Totsy planned to break up a journey by staying with a friend along the route in Corpus Christi, and that would give her plenty of time to keep her an appointment with a realtor the next day on the 13th. But as I said, to get to know this case, you really need to know the type of woman that Totsy was. So born in 1944 in Vietnam, Totsy knew what it was like to struggle. She was just a baby when Japanese troops took control of Japan, And through the subsequent loss of that control and the resistance to French control, Totsy's family struggled like many in these times to survive. She not only had a second grade education, she had to leave that and help her family earn money. She did labouring and odd jobs, including hauling bricks, with her petite little frame. And after the death of her father, finances became even more important in the household. So much so, by the age of 14, Tot had an arranged marriage to a Vietnamese military officer. This didn't mean that they were financially free. Tot still had to work at that young age of 14, and she used her skills as a seamstress. She cooked, she worked as a maid for a wealthy family in the city to make money. This meant moving from the countryside that she loved, but she was prepared to do what she had to do to support her family. When she was 22, she gave birth to their son Min, but tragedy would strike soon when she was left a widow when her husband was killed in what is now known as the Vietnam War. She was left to raise her young son on her own during the war times. But in 1968, during the war, her life would change once again. She was riding her bike in Tay Ninh, where she collided with an American merchant marine on the busy street. She might have damaged her bike, but for Clint Harriman, the American military officer, the impact went straight to his heart. It was love at first sight. Clint was an incredibly special man with an already distinguished military career. He was a straight shooter. He told things how they were, and it seems that although vastly different, he and Totsy were a perfect foil for one another. Clint was actually one of the very few survivors of one ship that went down off the coast of Brazil in World War II, and Clint was a good 20 to 24 years older than Totsy. And even though they were unable to communicate in a common language, there was something there, and the handsome older man and military officer next day delivered a new bite to Totsy. Despite the language difficulties, this was a love match. But Totsy was wary that he was an American that just wanted a girl in every port, so to speak. And it took Clint a year of wooing her when she finally realised that his intentions were serious. The two soon married in front of the village chief, and they bought an apartment in Saigon and a home in the country. Min was the size of a loaf of bread at this time, according to Clint, and he would be the only father that he knew. The two, despite being married, would not see each other much, as Clint's career in the ongoing war took him away from his family. And the first 6 years of their marriage, most of the time was spent apart. Tot would only see Clint when he came to South Vietnam, and Totsy was of course living in Vietnam. But despite the absence, within 2 years, the two soon welcomed their first child together, who they named Tu Hong, which means morning rose, and she was born in December of 1970. Tu and Totsy began living in the countryside at their home with Totsy's extended family. And Totsy's husband, Clint, he should also have a movie made about him and his distinguished career and presidential awards and honours. He was not naive like Totsy in political and military matters. He knew that the war in Vietnam was getting extremely dangerous for his family, and he was in New York in the spring of 1975 when he felt that it was imperative to get his wife and children out of Vietnam. US troops had already almost fully withdrawn from Vietnam, and it was predicted that Saigon would fall into the hands of the North Vietnam's communist forces. And Clint feared for Tot's safety, especially due to her past marriage to a South Vietnamese military officer and her current marriage to an American soldier defending the South. He begged the captain of the USNS Greenville Victory to let him board. It was the only ship going to Asia. The captain eventually relented and let him on board. But on the way, disaster would happen when Clint slipped on ice and broke his leg. His leg swelled up and he was told he wasn't fit for duty. But he was insistent he had to get to Vietnam to save his family. Eventually his persistence paid off and they relented. especially when they were told he was the medical officer for the ship. And even then, it wasn't easy for him. He had to be carried up the gangway and not being able to do anything. Frustratingly, the ship also wasn't going direct to Vietnam, but rather dropping ammunition along the way before docking in Thailand. They weren't there long though before news spread and it was all hands on deck. They were going to start evacuating in Vietnam. Clint, still with his swollen leg, he sweet talked the captain to let him off board on the guise of removing the cast on his leg. That cast had now gone soft and his leg was swelling, but as well as carrying out this medical procedure, he was also going to get his wife and children out of the country. That was the real plan. Tot, according to Clint, was pretty oblivious to the seriousness of the situation, thinking that it was just a minor offshoot war and things would all work out and things would be okay. Clint knew that this was not the case and he made arrangements for a commander to provide accommodation for him at the base in Newport where they stayed a night. More gathered throughout the evening at this home and in total there were 15 odd people, friends and relatives of the commander in one room. Clint would later say he knew it was going to be the end of life as they knew it over there. The next night they stayed in a hotel, Clint not being comfortable with so many people in one room and not used to extended family living. By this time people were travelling from the north to escape the communist troops and the Victory had actually moved 50 miles southeast from Saigon to Vung Tau. This meant that Clint, with his broken leg and trying to rescue his family, now had to make it even further, 50 miles, whilst in the midst of an evacuation and a war. He called in a favour from an owner of a steamship company who supplied him with an old car and a driver that drove them to meet the Victory some 50 miles away. The roads were clogged. People were trying to get out. Progress was slow. Along the roadside, people had discarded much of their goods on the way so that they could get out faster and not be shackled by these possessions. Even livestock was on the road. In the distance, they could see the safety of the ship in the harbour, but it was so far away, and it was such a challenge to reach it. First challenge was reaching a barricade, where a soldier put a rifle through the driver's window, demanding they get out and walk. Clint, with his swollen, still healing, broken leg, couldn't walk. He looked the soldier up and down and he described him as a pimply-faced and country boy, and he took a chance that he didn't speak English. He asked his wife to tell the driver to turn the car around and go as fast as he could back to Saigon. And Clint, who didn't like speeding, was relieved when the driver followed instructions. They got 20 miles down the empty road before they could see in the distance another barricade being erected. 55-gallon drums were being laid in place across the road, preventing cars from passing. In the car on the floor, Clint assessed the situation. He had a box of grenades, a 45 automatic and a 38 special, and boxes of ammo for both. The old man driving the car was starting to slow down for the barricade, but Clint instructed his wife again to tell him to step on the accelerator, and if he didn't do that, he would turn actually one of the weapons he had on him. He stepped on it. He grazed one of the barrels and it went flying in the air, and as they took a bend in the road, the soldiers shot at the car 3 times, missing them each time. The driver then told them that he used to work in the area when he was younger and he knew of a country road that they could turn off on. It looked as if the main roads would be cut off. They might not get through another barricade. They might not be so lucky. They might find better marksmen along this journey. And Clint weighed up the options. Either the driver was leading him into a trap or to safety. But either way, he knew the main road was being barricaded and it would be more of a risk. He went with his gut and the driver turned down the bumpy old road. And in the distance, they could see helicopters land and North Vietnamese soldiers exiting AK-47s in hand. Clint later recalled, he said to his wife, "Screw it, if we're going, I'm going to take a couple of them with me, I think." And she had the goddamn courage to say, "Well, darling, at least we'll all die together." Clint said, "That gave me great courage." I don't even know if she knew what she was saying, but it came out pretty good. They ended up travelling for 80 miles down a country road, often going into the jungle, and then they came across a sentry box, and an American soldier was standing guard. Luckily, they had the papers showing their intent to be married in the US and a state pass signed by a colonel. They were worried, though, that they wouldn't be given entry at that time. A Vietnamese woman with a white man was not looked on favourably, but they were allowed to pass. The papers from the colonel and Clint's network of higher-ups had made it possible for them to enter. They made their way to the Seamen's Club at the base, which was deserted. Everyone had evacuated and left. So they helped themselves to drinks and played bartender, with Clint knocking down some vodka to ease the pain in his leg, and getting the poor old man who had driven the car, who was a bit shell-shocked by the whole experience, as he'd risked his life for these strangers. They gave him a nice soda and $20 of the $600 that Clint had with him. The car wasn't working anymore, it had been through too much in this escape, and the old man walked out of the base and out of this story. No one knows what happened to him. But Clint looked, and he had $580 and just his weapons to get his wife and children out of Vietnam, with a bung leg and a wife that didn't speak English fluently. It must have been a tricky experience. Clint again called on his contacts to get on a US Lines ship, the Pioneer Contender, that was docked to take him down the river to Saigon so they could get their son. His leg was so swollen by this time, he said it resembled a sewer pipe. And the captain, though, he wasn't cooperating, he wasn't having it, and he was quite prepared for them to wait on the pier. Meanwhile, his wife and daughter and the driver of the car can hear shots in the distance, and the driver makes the decision to leave the pier with his wife. Clint was left alone with his daughter to get a lift down the river and take them to the Victory. He was separated from his wife and son. So Clint and his daughter got a lift on a Vietnamese soldier's motorbike, and he goes back to speak to his contact, demanding that the ship captain take them down the river. And this time the contact came back and he spoke to the ship's captain. And this time the ship's captain didn't muck around. He took notice because he threatened him that if he didn't take them on board and down the river now, he wouldn't be paid. And that would have meant a loss of about $27,000 a day. Within half an hour, Clint and his daughter were heading down that river. And the captain of the Victory sent a lifeguard to pick him up when they docked. His 4-year-old daughter was thrown to the ship some 15 feet and caught by an athletic marine. Using his higher-up contacts again allowed Totsy to travel back to the country and collect her son. This was arranged through Colonel Vong, who ensured that she had papers where she would be the only Vietnamese civilian woman to be accepted on a US ship. Her quest to get her old child was difficult. And although she did get rides from some people, she walked some 23 miles of the journey through the jungle, through the rubble, through coconut plantations, through rubber plantations, all while juggling a small child and a suitcase, and until she got to Saigon. She had hours to spare before the fall of Saigon, when the authority from Colonel Vong once again allowed her to board the last ship out, the Bu Hong Pioneer. Meanwhile, Clint and his daughter were already in the Philippines, not knowing what had happened to Totsy and Min, whether they'd escaped, if they were alive, if the pass from Colonel Vong had given them the access they were promised. Luckily, they didn't have to wait too long, and Clint would get word in the Philippines that they'd made it out. He was given a launch to meet the boat the next day, but by the time he got there, she was already in Guam. This family was split in half in different countries. Not long after, Totsy and arrived at a refugee camp in Indiana, in Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. Eventually, the camp would swell to over 20,000 refugees. Clint, finding her, called her and said, "Don't move." It had already been months apart. And by the end of summer, Tot and Min were cleared to leave the camp and travelled to Lake Tahoe in Nevada, where they reunite with Clint and two. That was 3 months until they were reunited, and the two began their new life together in the US. The first thing they had to do was get married so that their marriage would be legally recognised, and Clint ended up adopting Min, who has only ever known Clint as his father. If you have a chance, I'll put a link to Clint's account of this escape in the description below. He was a straight shooter and his account is pretty colourful, which is why I haven't included it here other than some of the less colourful quotes. And have a look at his military record and I think you'll see why he was able to get this family out. Clint was an amazing man with an amazing career, and there could be a movie written about him. His survival from a ship that was sunk, his rescuing of the SS Mayaguez, a US ship that was captured by the Khmer Rouge, and his escape with his family and everything he did to get them out of Vietnam. The family ended up settling in South Portland, Maine to be closer to Clint's mother, and eventually they would move to a house near the ocean in Cape Elizabeth. The house had panoramic views of the bay and Totsy could enjoy gardening and her love of fishing. And after 2 years in 1977, the couple had their last son together, Chin Si, whose name means brave warrior. Considering all they had been through together in the US, it seems an apt name. While Clint continued his distinguished career with the Merchant Marines and achieved more honours and awards for his service, Totsy and the family quickly adapted to life in the US. Always wanting better for her children than what she had, Totsy made sure her children attended school, and she became the mum in the area that everyone loved. No matter what the occasion, she was there to feed them and provide them and look after her children's friends. Their home was filled with warmth and love, and it was the place that kids wanted to hang out with. She was everyone's mum. Even though this would have been enough for most people, for Totsy she still had more to give. Her English had improved and she saw this as an opportunity to help other Vietnamese immigrants adapt to life in the US. She would help them get to know the area, find a home for newly arrived refugees and teach them about the differences between US culture and Vietnamese culture so that they could adapt and also gain employment in the future. She would tell her children, if everyone worked together, there could be something better for all of us. And even though she wasn't 100% fluent in English, she was able to offer her services as an interpreter as well. She taught others how to cook as well, and she even had time to use her unbelievably delicate skills to hand bead and brocade wedding dresses for those that wanted it and couldn't afford a designer dress. So if you've ever seen that sort of delicate hand beading, you know how long it takes and how detailed and fine it is. And her cooking was so good that she eventually opened a restaurant named after their daughter, where she cooked and hosted as well. But it wasn't all work and no play. She was also known for her wide smile, her jokes, her funny faces, and how she loved to dress up and sing and dance. She would laugh at her accent and her inability to spell well. She was just beloved. For 14 years, life was good. But then in 1992, Clint passed away. Totsy was now alone without the man she'd fallen for in Vietnam, and without the father that their children adored. Clint was in his 70s when he passed, but Totsy was still young, in her early 50s, with 2 of her 3 children already at university and her youngest in high school. After Clint's death, she took her family to Vietnam so they could understand their culture and meet their extended family. And while there, of course, Totsy's compassion didn't end. She helped her family, helped them create businesses, started up businesses so that they could find a way to live and support themselves in the country that they loved. 4 years went past, and Totsy, with her children now grown, decided that she was ready to start a new chapter. Her youngest had gone to college at Stanford, and it was time to get on with her life. She moved to Florida as she loved the warmth and the heat. They reminded her of Vietnam. And she also met a man, John. The pair made a life in a small town in Florida, and life was good for 5 years, until once more Totsy was left alone when her partner passed away. Although she loved her life in Florida and the weather and the water, she wanted to be close to her family. Her 2 eldest children were already settled in Texas, and she wanted to be near them and near their grandchildren and also near the water. With the help of her children, she narrowed down the places that were near to her family to visit, but also warm with the water that she loved. And she decided on the Texas coast and the best areas to search between League City and Corpus Christi. She planned the trip and mapped out her route with her daughter, a Marine now who had followed in her father's footsteps. She was excited. She had arranged an appointment with a real estate agent. She wanted to build her dream home near the water and maybe enough to invest in more real estate. It was a far cry from the young mother who had escaped from Vietnam with a suitcase. She set off on the morning of the 12th of July with a route planned to avoid the busy roads and highways that she detested. A neighbour saw her packing her car around 5:30 a.m. and along Highway 35 she knew she'd see more of the coastline and the Gulf Coast. Her rose-coloured 1996 Lincoln Continental had Florida personalised tags saying Totsy on the rear and on the front was a Navy SEAL emblem. A friend tried to call her cell phone at 8:30 a.m. and it rang 4 times before going to voicemail, indicating that the phone was still on. But when he tried to call again at approximately 10:30 a.m, his call went directly to voicemail, indicating that the phone had been turned off. Totsy's 2 eldest children also tried to call her, but there was no answer and she didn't call them. Her youngest son was away on a rafting trip through the Grand Canyon and out of cell phone range for several days. But it was really unusual. She hadn't checked in with any of her children like she normally did every few hours. She didn't arrive at the friend's home that she'd arranged to stay with on the evening of the 12th of July. And Min, not hearing from her, called the friend and found out she hadn't arrived. She hadn't called. She hadn't left a note. The next day, she missed her afternoon appointment with the realtor that was made for the 13th of July. In fact, Totsy has never been seen again. The police were called and Totsy was reported missing on Monday, the July 16th, by her family in Texas. In the meantime, youngest son Chin is still in the Grand Canyon, having no idea that his mother was missing. It would be days later when he exited the canyon that he was told that he urgently needed to call his family. And once he had the news, he quickly made his way from California to Texas to do everything he could to find his mother. Initially, the police focused on the route that Tot was planning to take along the Gulf Coast. They scoured the area for any signs of her car or any clues that could lead to her whereabouts. Despite their efforts, the search didn't yield any results. There was some leads. One was that there was a possible sighting of Tot's car in the Houston area. A sketch was created of the male driver, but this lead went nowhere. Chin-Se, her youngest, claimed that people in the Houston area reported seeing the car at times being driven by a small woman who looked confused and at times recklessly on the highway early in the morning by a young man. He said one guy swears that he saw the Totsy license plates and that they have 30 or more sightings. Chin believes, "I'd bet my life that one of them's true," leads some credence to a kidnapping theory. She was generally wary of people who could hurt her outwardly, but she was really friendly and more likely to talk to older women or well-dressed people According to her family, she would avoid people that were large or looked frightening. But she was incredibly friendly. One of her children said that she would even go through the phone book, and if people had her last name in Vietnamese, she would ring them up and introduce herself. The police ultimately put out a teletype on the car statewide. So if the car was pulled over or found abandoned, it would show up as belonging to a missing person. Back then, in terms of the local police stations along the route, getting pictures of the car sent to them, that took over 3 weeks. And Chen even says that local police officers walking the beat in Houston, he would approach them with a flyer that they'd created and ask if they knew that Totsy was missing, and they'd never heard of it. So it obviously wasn't going out on day-to-day bulletins and briefings. There were even sightings as far as the Victoria area, but it seems that all of these leads led nowhere. The Special Crime Service at the Texas Department of Public Safety worked with the League City Police Department, and they said that they haven't been able to find any evidence of the car. They haven't found the license plates on the road somewhere. They haven't confirmed any sightings. One of the first things that they did was start at Min's home and follow the route she planned to take, and they went all the way to Palacios. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. They stopped at every ravine, every bar ditch, every body of water. And there were 3 or 4 places that we looked that she might have run off the road, but they weren't really satisfied with what they found. They used a fixed-wing aircraft to fly over the area. They went back with helicopters. They looked out with boats, and they also contacted the FBI to see if there was anything else they could have done. Who told them, "You've done everything we would have done." Meanwhile, League City police detectives checked her finances, her credit card statements. She hadn't used her mobile phone, she hasn't used her credit cards, and there was nothing in her phone records or credit card statements of any significance. Tot's family and friends, and now with her youngest son, also organised their own search party. With friends, they created flyers, they handed them out on the streets, social media was used. Her youngest son, Chen Zi, created a website called findtot.org, which is now archived. They approached the press, there were newspaper articles, anything that they could do to spread the word through major news outlets and TV stations, they did. But there were no leads, and the search wasn't easy to do either. They had several challenges. The terrain on the Gulf Coast makes it difficult to search. Also, the heat and the humidity of the Texas summer made it actually physically challenging for searchers. I've actually been to Texas in the summer, and I don't know how you cope. Wow, it gets hot there. I mean, they say Australia's hot, but whew, it is hot. Even Texas EquiSearch, which is a horse search and rescue team, they combed Highway 35 on foot and on horseback. They searched in ditches, creeks, forests, brush, side roads, anywhere, looking for any sort of clue. Broken guardrails, rubbed off paint, tyre tracks, skid marks, any of her personal belongings. But nothing has been found. Despite all of these obstacles, the search party went for weeks and weeks, but there were just no leads and no clues. It's like she disappeared. The towns that she would have passed through were also canvassed, bearing in mind that she was an extremely friendly woman, although she was cautious about who she made friends with. And no one mentioned seeing her. The family finds this really odd because of her friendly nature. Her daughter said if she sees someone that she likes, she'll approach them and talk to them. Totsy lived for her children, and her family was everything to her. There was no way that she would leave them without a word. Her whole life revolved around them, including where she would be spending the next chapter of her life. Her youngest son's birthday came on the July 21st, and there was no word from his mother. People started to come up with theories. Perhaps she had a stroke or somehow got amnesia. And although you can't rule those things out, even if they happened, where is she? And where's her car? Maybe she got lost, especially if she went off the main highway. Or maybe she ran into people that had bad intentions. These are some of the things that the family was thinking. A $10,000 reward was offered, and the money for that was actually put up half by Tot's family and half by the Carol Sund Foundation. The police mainly have two theories about what has happened to Totsy. The first is that she had an accident in a place that keeps her car hidden, a deep canal or bayou, of which there are a number of spots along that highway where that could have happened. And perhaps one day Adventures with Purpose will take on Totsy's case and be able to check out those waterways. The second theory is that she was abducted and her car stolen. The area that she was driving through had been associated with a number of crimes of a very violent nature, and it actually has been given the name the Texas Fields. However, Totsy does not seem to fit neatly into the age and type of other women who have gone missing or had these horrendous crimes committed against them in that area. The women that fit into that profile are generally in their 20s or younger, and generally not Vietnamese or Asian. That doesn't mean that that theory can be dismissed, but it's not typical of the history of the crimes in that area. Time went on and the family had to come to terms with the search effort hadn't achieved anything. So a year after to the day that Totsy went missing, a memorial was held for her in Maine, where she spent so much of her life in the US. All of the people that had been touched by having Totsy in their lives attended and remembered the woman who meant so much to them. A headstone was created and placed next to Clinton's in Riverside Cemetery in Maine. And on the headstone, although there's details of Totsy's life, there's just one heartbreaking word: missing. Her family have said they'll never give up hope that she's out there and that they'll find her, and know that there's someone out there that can help them. Chen C has turned this experience with his missing mother to help others through missing persons charities, and Totsy, I think, would be pleased to see that all of her children have done so well in life. They have great jobs, they have great communities and great compassion. The only thing is, they don't have answers on where their mother is. And I think I'll finish it up with a little quote from her youngest son about his mother Totsy. She has this special way about her because she's had such a difficult life that she counts what she now has as blessings. Because of her experiences in Vietnam, when other people are having a rough day, she helps them put things in perspective. And she's done this with numerous people my whole life. She continues to amaze people with her passion and with her incredible strength and zest for life. She's really infectious in her good spirits. Obviously, if you know anything about Totsy or the car, I'll put pictures up here at the end. Please call the authorities. The number is below. I can't imagine having gone this long without any answers as to what happened to Totsy. I'd love to hear what you think. I had to cut quite a bit out of this about Totsy's life, but I think you can fill in the gap. And there is an excellent podcast about her life if you're interested in finding out more about Totsy. It's called Murder She Told, and I'll put a link to it below the video. But she was just an all-round amazing woman. So I hope that someday her family get answers. Until next time, stay safe and happy colouring.